Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's CHXD webinar, The Design Revolution in Healthcare, Aligning Culture and Behavior to Better Integrate Human-Centered Design into Healthcare Organizations. My name is Catherine Houtman, and I'm the Director of the Center for Health Experience Design here at MadPow, and I'm really excited you were able to join us, and I hope you're enjoying our entire series of webinars. Now, I just want to start with just a brief introduction to what is the Center for Health Experience Design. We're founded by MadPow a few years ago, and basically we're a community of over 800 professionals and a range of organizations in the health space. Our partners include fledgling startups and global organizations. And we, as I said, we are part of MadPow. And MadPow is a design agency that's been around almost 20 years, and we leverage strategic design and the psychology of motivation to create innovative experiences and compelling digital solutions that are good for people and good for business. So we're using GoToWebinar for this, and what we're going to be doing is presenting for about 45 minutes, and then we'll spend like 5 to 10 minutes answering your questions. All you need to do is to enter your questions into the box on the right-hand side on the interface. If we do run out of time, you can email us directly. We are also recording this, so if you are unable to stay with us for the entire time, we'll be sending out the link shortly after the webinar. So let me pass this over to Adam and Lindsay. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Hi, everybody. My name is Adam Connor. I am VP of Design Transformation at MadPow. I've been in the design and strategy space now for about 18 years, and about 6 years ago, realized that the thing that I liked most about my work wasn't necessarily the products or services I was helping create, but it was trying to figure out how to get everybody through a project creating amazing things and not killing each other. And that's really where the design transformation program came from at MadPow. Our goal is to help our clients build and strengthen the innovation and design practices within their own organizations.
And hi, I'm Lindsay Mustervy. I'm a senior organizational designer at MadPow. My background is in psychology, anthropology, and design, and I've worked in this space for about 10 years or so now, starting in product and service development, moving into business model development, and now into organizational development. And we're happy to be with you today. So we're going to start this webinar just with a quick story that helps give a little bit more context as to what we're going to talk about today. So throughout my own career in design and research, I've always been drawn to the healthcare space, like many people, because of its challenging nature through, dealing with the regulatory issues, thinking about how to work with different types of people, clinical staff, and really, there's a lot of interesting things going on in healthcare. And through this passion for healthcare and transformation, at one point in my career, I joined a healthcare provider in their innovation center. Now, before I joined, they had already established a strategy or a vision for how they planned to develop new care delivery models. And they were actually pretty smart about it. They recently, the organization went through a transformation process, building in principles of lean development, lean product development, integrating into the way that they did their work. And so the Innovation Center wanted to leverage that. They wanted to use the language and those principles as part of the way that we developed new care delivery models, but also merging it with a human-centered design approach to add those missing elements of, building empathy, developing creativity, and using design as a process and approach and a tool. So they had this good strategy really built on the context of the current organizational structure. The current organizational culture. But what we had yet to develop and really fully test and explore were the tactics. So how this vision of merging these two distinct models for innovation would actually play out in reality. So what were the processes, what were the practices that we could use and that we could take from each of those different models? How could we really leverage the best of both worlds and fill in the gaps of the other? And when we started getting into the nitty-gritty, questions came up, such as, when should we prototype versus pilot, at what point during the process, or how to actually meaningfully engage with patients? How do we bring them into the process? What points of the process would we bring them in? How would we use their feedback and their insights? What were the tools that we would use to capture their insights and use those to develop these new models of care? But we didn't really have any basis for making those decisions. So we kept on going in circles around what was the best approach to use. And what we found, was part of the problem is that there were so many different tactics that we can choose from. This is just one list, of different types of approaches, tools, tactics that you can use in order to integrate human-centered design and innovation into an organization. So really, we were overwhelmed by this choice. And what Adam and I have found in working with organizations trying to do this type of work is that this is a common experience. While that vision or that strategy might be clear, it's difficult to determine what are the right tactics, what are the right approaches and tools that we can use to really infuse human-centered design and innovation effectively. Should you use training and boot camps to really instill those principles and practices across different teams? Or should it be an innovation lab, or keeping it simple in offer office hours? So really, again, there's so many options out there. How do we determine which one would be most effective? And one way, one method that people use is what we call following the leader, or going with what others are doing. As you can see from this benchmarking innovation report, there's certain tactics that healthcare organizations have reported to have had higher value than others within this field. And so if you took that at face value, looking at crowdsourcing ideas and innovation challenges to be quote unquote of higher value, perhaps you would be inclined to just go with that. Let's try out that. Let's employ those and integrate that into our organization.
So if follow the leader is one approach, and we've worked with a number of organizations that have done this, have looked at peers and mimicked what they're doing, and very often what they find is that what works in one organization doesn't necessarily work in another. A second approach that we often see is what we might call the process and roles approach, and this approach is really about understanding the entire end-to-end process of design and innovation, and really almost like inventorying it to make sure that you have all of the different skill sets, capabilities, tools, infrastructure necessary to make this process work. So one of the ways that we often illustrate this design process is this double loop model, with the the left-hand side there being more of the foundational side, the research up front, doing some investigation into an initial problem space, coming up with some concepts, doing some early experimentation to refine those concepts, and then moving into the right side loop, which is more of a continuous design, build, and delivery model to refine and evolve concepts over time as they scale into larger audiences, into larger use case and problem sets. And this really does this model really helps us kind of see the connection between the why and the how that's important. And so this model has worked for some folks in terms of kind of gathering up the right skill sets, because as you work through it, you can see that, okay, if we're going to follow this model, well, we know we're going to need research. We know we're going to need some strategic thinking around product and service. We know we're going to need product designers, developers, product managers. It can be easy to kind of build a catalog of sorts of the different skills, the different roles, the different stages of the process that you might need to facilitate. And like I said, we've worked with a number of organizations that have initially used this to acquire those things. But what's really interesting in working with those organizations is when you start to look at what are their obstacles then, you start to see things like this. This comes from the same study that Lindsay pointed out earlier. People were asked, what were the obstacles to design and innovation in their organization? And the things on this list, as you can see, none of them are really around, we don't have a research team or we don't have product designers. They're not that process and role-based stuff. There are things like turf wars and cultural issues and not adopting emergent technologies, which I would actually argue is also a cultural element. Actually, most of these things here really boil down to kind of the underpinning environment and culture of an organization and the thing that connects people and how they interact and make decisions in their day-to-day.
So coming back to this idea of strategy and tactics, we need both. Excuse me. We need both in order to do this work. Really, how are we instilling and infusing human-centered design and innovation in our organizations? But what it comes down to, hopefully we made the point that really we need to think about culture, the cultural issues, as Adam pointed out, not adopting technology or lacking a vision. Those are things that affect how well we're able to, or how effectively we can actually do this type of work in infusing these beliefs and these values. And the other piece is getting tactical, and that comes down to behaviors. What are the specific interventions and approaches that will change the behaviors that are helping or hurting those efforts? And so, here we want to introduce what we're talking about around, around all of this. And really, this is about design transformation. And how we define that is that we're aligning an organization's people, practices, and systems to strengthen, scale, and evolve both design and innovation capabilities. And I think hopefully we made the point again that this, we need to be able to think about how we're doing this from the cultural lens, so an organization's beliefs and their values, what's driving their vision, what's driving the work, what's driving their mission, as well as the behavioral elements. So what are the organizational behavioral elements? So what are the actual behaviors of the people that work there that are helping or hurting these efforts? So what we're going to do now is actually take a quick poll to learn about your own design transformation efforts and where you and your organization fall. So, Catherine, if you can put that poll up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we have here is the question we're asking: where is your organization in terms of its development of human-centered design and innovation capabilities? So you can select one of the following, whether you currently have external partners that provide these capabilities for us, or maybe you're in the early stages of building these capabilities in-house in your own organizations. Maybe you have them, you've developed human-centered design and innovation, but you're really working on improving their effectiveness and how well they can actually, work to improve the way that you work. Maybe you have them, but you're working to scale and spread them across the organization to different teams and different departments. And perhaps none of these apply. There's some other a form of development that applies to your organization. So take a moment to take that poll.
Okay, we're at 73% voted, so if you just want a few more of you just want to get your vote in there, I'd like to get as close to 100% as possible. All right, 84%, we're getting there. Let's get to 90 and then I'll shut it down. We can see what the results are. Okay. So let me share the results. So Adam, Lindsay, here you go.
Great. So yeah, so it looks like a lot of you are in some early stages building these capabilities in-house. So that's awesome to hear. You know, I think design and innovation are often strongest when they come internally. You're closest to your audiences, you're closest to your existing products and services. So hopefully, you know, what we'll share today will give you a little bit more insight into some additional tactics that you might be able to employ in building those things. Looks like another good amount is around improving effectiveness. And that's awesome as well, in the sense that very often when we're working with organizations or teams on effectiveness, it's really the cultural pieces that shine the strongest light on areas that can be strengthened and improved. It can be easy to see some of the process stuff using diagrams and things like what I showed earlier, but some of that cultural pieces are a little harder to uncover, and so hopefully some of the techniques here will be useful to you as well. There's a good amount that are none of these apply, so that's intriguing as well. Kind of wish we could add more than 5 options here, so we could dive deeper into that, but maybe we'll have time for some of that in the Q&A. So we're gonna move on. So picking back up on our topic here, you know, what we really wanted to cover today in this webinar, you know, is give you kind of a glimpse into how we've been exploring this idea of design culture, design and innovation culture, and using it to help organizations grow and scale and strengthen their capabilities. And what really became apparent over the years that we've been working with different groups and talking to them and learning about what works and what hasn't worked is that we needed some kind of an additional lens or model to use kind of and balance with that process and role model that I showed earlier. And so through those conversations, what's developed has been this fitness model. And so this is a group of 7 kind of high-level categories that help kind of collect some of the primary characteristics that we found that are really important to organizations that are able to effectively use human-centered design and innovation. I'm not going to go through all 7 of these right here, right now. We're going to get into these a little bit more in just a moment. We're going to do a quick kind of high-level self-assessment. Earlier today, you should have gotten a worksheet from Catherine. If you have that printed out next to you, you can use that to kind of capture your self-assessment. I believe it's also available over in the GoToWebinar toolbar under handouts. That's just a quick little worksheet for keeping track of your scores. But this model has been useful for us as giving us kind of a second way to talk about a team and really look at the shape of a team or a practice. And so with these 7 categories, what we tend to do, we do this a couple different ways. We'll do self-assessments where we have people kind of assess their own interpretations of their practices and give things scores, and that gives us a shape. We'll also do kind of an independent assessment, kind of as an outsider. It's always interesting to compare and contrast those. But what this does is it gives us an idea of the shape of an organization and where certain qualities are maybe a little weaker, maybe they have a few more barriers there, as well as where there are strengths, where there are things that maybe we can build upon. So, for example, in this example organization, you can see some strengths in design and innovation, practice and execution. So there's obviously some good energy, some good flow in those areas, and maybe we can build on that to strengthen others.
So before we get into the self-assessment, just a quick note about, a couple things about the assessment itself that we're going to do today. First is that we want to acknowledge that there's overlap across categories. As you can see, there's execution, and then there's design and innovation practice. Those may have, similar themes that fall under them. They're fluid. These don't exist in silos. So we just want to acknowledge that, each of these categories influence one another. The next is that these statements, the statements that we're going to ask you to rate yourselves on, these just represent a subset of attributes that fall under each category. So obviously, for the purposes of this webinar, we have limited amount of time, but in our more full assessment that we would do with organizations, we would have many more scales, many more themes that fall under each category. So just wanted to point that out. And then, again, this is just meant to be a high-level assessment. Hopefully, this will give you a starting point to think about different aspects of the way that your team works in the way and the values of your organization and its priority around some of these categories. So, there's a lot more that we can talk about, offline. We'd love to hear from you, but again, this is meant to be kind of a starting point to see, to get a sense of where your organization falls. So with that, hopefully you take your worksheets, and if you don't have the worksheet printed out, grab a piece of paper and a pen. How this is going to work, we're going to have 3 statements under each of the categories. And each statement has, you can see the scale up at the top. There'll be a scale from 1 to 5. So 1 representing whether you strongly disagree with the statement, 5 being that you strongly agree with it. And so, again, vision and direction is about how well your organization establishes and communicates a shared or clear vision for the product, service, or offering that you're developing. So the first theme that we want to talk about is clarity. Our teams always have a clear vision of the product, service, or offering that we're working on. So this vision can come in the form of narratives. It can be design principles, storyboard, anything that really helps to get all parties aligned around a common understanding of the intended impact of whatever it is you're developing. So take a second to rate yourself. Next is iteration. Teams continually strive to refine and evolve this vision. Again, we know that things may shift internally. Priorities may change, or it could be externally. Your customer base may shift based on things that are outside of your control. So are your teams, are your organizations is your organization set up to actually revisit this vision to ensure it still holds true? Okay. And the last one is connection. So team members see a direct connection between their work and achieving the vision. Essentially, is this vision giving people their purpose and their mission? Do they understand how the work that they do day to day actually fits in with furthering the mission of the organization?
And so we're going to move on to our next category, which is around learning and measurement. So this is not really just do you do quantitative and qualitative research. This has more to do with are you able to take in information from research, from observation, and do something with it? Is it disseminated through the organization? Does it change the shared understanding across the organization? Does it really kind of permeate beyond just say a research team? So, so the first statement we have here is around the methods. So we use a variety of complementary methods to collect data and insights about our customers and their needs. So this gets to that balancing qualitative and quantitative, making sure you're looking at things through at different angles to make sure that you're really getting a robust set of information to develop insights from. And next, we have use of insights. So we have an effective way to absorb and act on these insights to inform changes in decisions. This gets to what I was just mentioning about, being able to really get that information, the insights, the new understandings out into the rest of the organization so that it can be used, so that it can change the way decisions are made. And finally on this one, continuous practice. So our organization understands the importance of building a practice to gather customer feedback and identify their evolving needs and desires. So it's not just about, doing this in certain instances for certain projects at certain points in time. It's an ongoing thing. It's something that you're continuously doing, collecting this data and using it to realign.
Okay. Next is empowerment. So this is really about how well teams are able to make and execute autonomous decisions that align with the vision and strategy. So first is influence. Our team has the power to influence critical organizational decisions about strategy and the products, services, and offerings that you develop. So this is, again, about the reach of your influence. Does your team have the ability to help inform and make decisions that are outside of your day-to-day work? Next is self-direction. Our team has the autonomy to shape what we work on and how we work together, as long as it aligns to the vision. So is there trust in the organization, in your team, and the higher ups in your ability to actually direct your own work, to know what needs to get done to further the progress of what you're doing? And lastly, support. Our team can secure additional resources, such as money or people with different skill sets, with minimal bureaucracy and red tape. So, does your team have to continually fight for the resources it needs? Do you feel like you have to jump through hoops to get what you need? Or, is there kind of that trust built in and understanding and respect for your team and your discipline?
Experience orchestration is our next category. And so this really has to do with understanding end-to-end experiences. So really understanding, if you're working on a problem that has a specific touch point or set of touch points, the connection between touch points as well as what comes before and after them. We found that with any organization, really understanding that entire continuum is really essential, because that broader knowledge helps inform more discrete, targeted products, services, and interventions that you might create. So first one here, understanding. So we use personas, journey maps, and other tools to gain a deep understanding of the end-to-end customer experience. Has your organization really kind of externalized this understanding in a way so that everybody can see it and consume it? And next, focus. We use this understanding along with customer feedback and insights to direct our work in improving offerings and interactions with customers. So having this end-to-end vision is great. Using it as almost like a dashboard of sorts, though, to help align resources, focus efforts, that's an even better use of it as an ongoing tool. And finally, for this one, process maturity. We have the right tools and structures in place to optimize this process across different channels and offerings. Very often in organizations, we'll see some form of experience orchestration, but it'll be limited to just say their website or a digital channel. or they might have it, but it might take different forms across different channels, different groups managing those channels. So this is really about, do we have the maturity to connect these things all together?
Next is design and innovation. How well does your organization leverage design values and mindsets? So the first is customer centricity. Our organization, hey, Catherine, it sounds like we're getting a little feedback on the line.
Okay.
Are you mute?
Just wanted to see if everyone's muted. Thanks. Okay, customer centricity. Our organization always gives customer impact and business impact equal weight when making decisions. So this is really about, are the needs of the customers and the consideration about the customer on the same pedestal as business needs when you're making those decisions. Second is creativity. Our organization fully supports exploration and experimentation, including the possibility of learning from failure. So really, do you have the space to explore how you're combining and recombining ideas and being able to test them out without, fear of failure or, things going wrong? And finally, craft. Regardless of the medium or output, our organization emphasizes quality and details to ensure that we're creating the best version of our product, service, or offering. So really, this is, kind of about the devil's in the details. Are you thinking about kind of the smaller aspects that actually, make an impact on your customers? Really thinking about kind of the quality of the output.
All right, next category is execution. So this is really all about acknowledging the fact that we can come up with amazing ideas, but they really don't matter that much if we can't actually get them out into the world, deliver them, and continue to evolve them. So first up here, we have agility. We have established an effective structure to continuously and iteratively build, optimize, and deploy solutions. This, getting back to what Lindsay mentioned earlier about kind of overlap and on alignment, this gets related to learning and measurement. As you're taking in more information, can you iterate and evolve the direction that you're in based on what you're learning? Integrity. We expertly balance iteration and evolution with our commitment to the vision of the product and service offering. So it can be very easy as you're working on something, building something, to kind of get down a train of thought and be delivering and exploring specific things just based on what you're learning, but have that lead you astray from where your original objectives were. Can you go back and balance those two things and realign as necessary? And finally, for this one, perseverance. We have a shared determination to work through technical, organizational, and resource limitations. So we know from all the years we've been working in design and innovation that limitations are a constant thing that we have to deal with. And so having a team that really is determined to try to work through those things, not just give up and go do something else instead, is really critical.
And our last category is collaboration. How do individuals and teams collaborate across roles, departments, product lines, so forth. So the first is around trust. Our team feels safe and secure together, and we can depend on each other to follow through. So again, this kind of gets that psychological safety and, are people respecting differing viewpoints? Are you allowed to critique each other and, use that feedback to build better products and, improve what you're doing? Team focus. Team members put their own interests aside for the common good of the team. Again, are you coming together as a team versus, just having a set of individuals that have differing priorities that might, compete against each other? Are you really focused on the mission and the vision and what you're trying to achieve together. And finally, openness. We seek out unusual partners with different expertise to incorporate new perspectives and expand our thinking. So are you getting outside of your team, outside of the people that you typically work with in order to explore new perspectives, get new thoughts and ideas from others? It could be within your organization or outside. So hopefully that gave you some insight into where your organization or your team might have kind of stronger elements that you can leverage, that you can build upon, and where there might be some areas of opportunity. Later on, at the end of this webinar, Catherine will put up some questions, and we actually want to learn from you where the categories were where you were most strong, and which categories you were most weak in, or kind of your lowest scoring categories. So we would love to hear from you at the end. But the question is now, what do you do with this? What's the value of this fitness model? And so it really helps to provide that alignment and understanding, of what those strengths are and where there's potentially gaps in capabilities that can impact the success of any, design transformation effort. How, is collaboration low and in your organization, and how is that actually impacting the way that human-centered design and innovation is being infused and supported in your organization? And from that, from that alignment and understanding, you would be able to better prioritize your efforts. So, having that roadmap of where to start, where to focus your efforts in terms of thinking about where to start changing the way that you work. And from there, you can identify what are the tactics, what are the relevant tactics that you can use to bolster some of these different categories, kind of improving your organization's fitness. And these tactics are really about, what are the behaviors? How can we think about how we're changing certain behaviors that are hurting us, or how do we change behaviors to help bolster what we're doing? And so again, the tactics are tied to how do we think about behavior, organizational behavior.
So building on that and getting a little deeper into how we use this, as we do an assessment, as we find areas where we want to focus, we start to look for, how are people interacting, let's say, around vision and direction? How are they sharing the vision? How are they describing it? When presented with maybe a new use case and asked how the product or service might handle it, can they describe an ideal experience that's in line with the things that are already in place? If we start to look at things as behaviors, it gives us a new way of thinking about how we might change those behaviors. And the way we use or work with behavior change at MadPow is using a tool called the Combi Model. And this model helps us really understand why or what is needed for behavior to take place. And it's really simple. I'll just walk through it really quickly. What it basically says is that for any behavior to take place, you need, an individual needs the capability, and this is both physical and psychological. So capability is, can they do it? Physically, are they able to perform the behavior? Psychologically, do they know how to perform the behavior? Can they recognize the situation when that behavior is appropriate? They also need opportunity. They need to be in an environment that is suitable, that supports this behavior. So it has to be a physical environment. There can't be anything physically obstructing the behavior. It needs to be a social environment that's conducive to it. If I feel like doing something this way, interacting with somebody in a certain way is going to get me, branded as an outcast or shunned or just make me look weird, I'm probably not going to act or do that thing. And finally, motivation, automatic and reflective. So you want to try to align with the automatic motivation someone has, what they would do instinctively in a certain situation because it seems like the right thing to do, as well as reflectively. If I step back from this situation and think about what I should do, does this thing align with what I believe the right way to behave is? And these things start to reinforce each other, right? If we build people's capability to perform a certain behavior, it can contribute to more motivation. If we put them in situations where they have more opportunity, it can strengthen that motivation. And then, of course, performing the behavior, doing the thing, builds all of these things together. So this is really useful when we're thinking about organizational change. We're thinking about building practices because we can look at things in terms of, what can we manipulate in our organizations? And we have these levers for change. We have skills and knowledge. What do people know? What are they capable of doing? We have tools and materials, communication and language, incentives and metrics, structures and roles, processes and policies, spaces and environment, vision and strategy. We have all of these things, and they help us kind of shape our organizational culture, and we can line these things up directly with the Combi model and see, what they most act on. So a lot of these things will act on a number of, the COM, the capability, opportunity, motivation, but they all have their primary spaces. And one thing I love about this illustration is that we work with so many organizations where maybe they have a design thinking initiative and they've just been running boot camps left and right to try to get everybody on board with design thinking and using it wherever they can find spaces for it. And it doesn't take off. It doesn't hold. It flounders. And the reason for that, you can see from this diagram, is that boot camps, training efforts really only get at skills and knowledge. They really only work to build capability. They don't make any changes to people's motivations. They don't really make any changes to the opportunities that people have. And so they really do have a limited range of effect there. So just to kind of illustrate this all together for you, we want to give a quick case study for an organization that we've worked with. So this organization is a large insurance provider. They have a growing design and innovation group. When we started working with them, it was about 40 people. That included research, and they were aiming to double by 2020. And so these teams, these folks within this design group, were working in dedicated cross-functional groups. So I don't know if anybody is familiar with the Spotify model, but what that basically is a cross-functional model that you align around a product or a user journey or a specific need or touch point. So you have designers, developers, product managers, researchers, other relevant roles, consistently working together on in that one space, rather than being, working on 3 or 4 projects at any one time. And each time they were standing up a new team as they were scaling this to take on a new problem space, they basically kicked things off with 2 different design thinking based workshops where they would get together the core team as well as lots of additional stakeholders and influence partners to kind of set a direction for the group's work. And when we started working with them, we did a series of interviews and group discussions and self-assessments, and we used the process and role approach to really kind of make sure that they had all the pieces of the process. But we also did this fitness model assessment, and their shape came out to be this that you see on the right. And as we investigated it further, what we saw was that their weakest areas were really around vision and direction, collaboration, and experience orchestration. And that was we used that to decide where we wanted to focus some of our efforts. And so just examples of what we saw there. When we dig into these different areas, on the collaboration side, one of the things we look for in our deeper assessment is how they're sharing feedback. And in an ideal situation, these groups are routinely, openly sharing and exploring diverse feedback, including the dissenting perspectives to drive iteration, not just approval. And so we didn't see that here. There was feedback swirling around, but it wasn't necessarily of the greatest quality. People didn't really know what to do with it. It wasn't coming at the most opportune time. This communication was really struggling. And so what we worked with them on was doing some training and skill building around critique, really understanding what critique is and helping them incorporate it into their process cycles so that they had some really dedicated times to help gather this feedback the best possible way. But also by extension, as this was kind of modeled better ways of giving feedback, it extended into that more impromptu, more informal feedback giving as well. On the vision and direction side, something we look for is that the team is able to narratively describe an ideal customer experience for a given future interaction that's consistent with the experiences for other use cases. So narrative is really important in vision and direction. And what we found with this organization is that they had vision, but it really existed in the state of kind of sketched interfaces, sketched screen flows and things like that. And they really struggled when new use cases came up to even describe what the ideal experience would be in those situations, because they didn't have an interface drawing to capture that. Or when they found that a particular interface model wouldn't work, they struggled to kind of realign. And so what we worked with them was to create product principles that really got to what the character of their organization and their solution would be. So if they know their character, who they are, how they respond in certain situations, then that became kind of the core of how to describe experiences going forward. And finally, experience orchestration. Something we look for is that the team incorporates an understanding of the customer's experience pre and post touch point to inform their design. So as I mentioned, these groups were working kind of under a variation of the Spotify model. Each group basically had a touch point or a section of the journey, but they were working within that almost in a silo. They weren't paying a lot of attention to what came before and after, what interactions a customer would have before or after their touch point that they manage. And so we had the teams work on co-creating this end-to-end customer journey. And that was pretty easy. That went quickly. They all just kind of plotted where they were on their timelines. And but then what we had them do was spend a lot of time talking about all the spaces in between them. You know, what could be happening in somebody's life? How would the output or the outcomes of one set of interactions influence the next one? And that really helped them see how they needed to be kind of considerate of the things that happened before and after a customer interacted with the pieces and parts that they were responsible for. So just as an example of kind of how the Combi model fits into this, you know, getting back to that critique example on the collaboration side, what we wanted to make sure that we did as we built this out with them was that we paid attention to, if we want to build critique as a behavior, we need to think about capability. So we provided structure for them, and we worked to really build the right kind of framing for critique so that they had that, they understood when and how to use it. Motivation, nobody was not motivated to give feedback. Everybody wanted to give feedback, so that worked in our favor. And what we were able to do here was really just kind of align that motivation with this more productive use. And then in opportunity, because we worked it into their process, we created these additional kind of interaction points in their cycles that were focused on this feedback. We also did some other things like establishing work shares to kind of go beyond immediate teams and get work out there. And they started to integrate kind of non-critique conversations to talk about pertinent principles, personas, outcomes, and make sure that was included in all conversations. And so over the course of adopting these things and having them kind of reevaluate themselves, we saw, these shifts in these different areas. One thing that I'll just, to be completely honest and point out, I'll go back here, pay attention to the leftmost category, the three figures there. You'll see that in the updated, that actually goes back a little bit. That actually goes down a little bit. That one's empowerment. So what we found out, and this is anecdotally, we're just investigating it now, is that while everything else kind of went up, because initially the teams were kind of working in these silos, they felt empowered, they felt kind of self-contained, able to do what they wanted. As we connected them through that experience orchestration piece, as they kind of understood the influences that other people's work would have on theirs, it actually, we think, hypothesis, kind of reduced a little bit of that sense of autonomy, that sense of empowerment. So that's something, going forward that the groups will continue to work on. And this speaks to kind of that interconnectedness of these things, that they don't all exist independently of one another. You kind of have to watch them all together.
So you may notice, as Adam was highlighting that case study, it follows a specific approach around design transformation, around how we did this work. And just to make it a little bit more explicit, we started by understanding the current state of the organization, again, doing that initial assessment to understand kind of the shape of their fitness. From that, we were able to identify where the areas of focus. There were those three different areas that we needed to bolster in order to ensure that the fitness of their organization was improved, and therefore they were better able to incorporate those design practices. From that, developing a vision, so outlining all of those different tactics and strategies for how to bolster those different areas. And from there, enacting experiments. How could teams work differently? How can they incorporate these different tactics in order to see, are the behaviors change the way that they wanted to? Evaluating the impact. As Adam said, we reassessed them, and we found, they went down in certain areas. So at that point, we would iterate, figure out what else we could do, and from there, once we have a pretty good sense of what is working, scale. And so if you notice, bringing back the double loop of the design approach, our steps 1 through 3 really get at that first loop around problem identification, research synthesis, ideation, experimentation. Steps 4, 5, and 6 get to kind of the design and implementation of it. And so again, we do this because if you're essentially applying the same approach that you take to product development, service development, offering development, and using it to inform your own organization. So now what? You've done this assessment. What can you do from here? Well, obviously, what are the fitness categories that you feel are most impacting the success of the work that you're doing? Starting there. What are the behaviors that need to change, and what are the relevant tactics that you can employ? Maybe you've thought about different things that you could do. You've recognized, that things aren't working as well as they could. Can you use those to actually think about, how they might change the behaviors that you're seeking to improve, and focus on those tactics? Considering what aspects you can leverage that are within your control, understanding that maybe you don't have influence over higher level decisions that are made, but are there people, are there teammates that you can work with that are under your direct influence that can help you implement these different tactics? And finally, what are some small experiments that can set you up to try out new ways of working. Just simple little things that you can do to test out, are these actually changing behaviors in the way that we expected or not? And so I know we're kind of at our time. There's a lot more that we can go into, but we wanted to highlight, if you wanted to dig in more, if this sparks some ideas and interests, we are doing a CHXC design transformation workshop on October 17th at our Boston offices, and there's the web URL there if you want to learn more about that. Not a whole lot that we can get into in an hour, but hopefully we teed up some ideas, some ahas, some insights, and we'd love to hear from you.
Catherine, what's that?
So we finally reached the Q&A portion of this webinar. So I know we've only got 4 minutes, but we're happy to stick around a little later if you guys have time, if you have compelling questions that you'd like to be answered. So first, I want to say thank you so much for Adam and Lindsay. Really great presentation and very illuminating. And the information about the workshop. So if you really want to get a group of people together, the workshop we're having on October the 17th is all day. So it's 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. in our Boston office. And if you want to come alone or bring some of your fellow coworkers to sit there and really dive deep into your organization, it will be a really useful use of your time, I believe. So if you have any questions, just enter them into the question box and we would be happy to answer them. So Adam, as we're waiting for questions to come in, what would you say is like the biggest change you've seen after implementing this design fitness model? Like how much, I know you just gave us a whole story about one, but there's any specific story you could share?
I can share a little more generally. Catherine, I think your phone is calling echo.
Oh, look, I just got a question, so I'm going to put you on high. So you're off the stage now. Okay, so somebody put in the question. Would this mini assessment be suitable for our UX team members to do individually to see where our perspective on the state of our HCD presence differs?
Yeah, I actually love that. One of the things we do when we do this as an assessment with clients is to have them do that individually and kind of see what those differences are, just so that you can kind of understand how the perspective of maybe somebody on the research team differs from somebody on the design team, differs from somebody maybe on front-end development. So we always do it individually and do those comparisons to help get a sense of things.
Great. Got another question coming in. Let's say, curious about your approach to accessing a large organization. Do you work to reach all product/service teams and including internal teams like HR, or do you pick a few representative or prioritize teams to assess?
Great. Yeah, that's a great question. Oh, sorry, Catherine. Do you mind putting yourself on mute? Okay. So obviously, it would be hard to assess everyone in an organization. So what we tend to do is we try to identify who are the key stakeholders within this project. So thinking about, who's directly going to be kind of implementing, part of this design transformation effort, but also who are the people that are going to be directly impacted and indirectly impacted by this. So trying to look at these different levels of impact and influence and identify different groups of people there. Because really, the work that we're doing won't just be the people that we're working directly with. Again, it'll be, it'll kind of spread and have impact in a lot of different ways that we can't predict. So we want to make sure that we're involving different folks there. We also, we want to make sure that we're getting a cross-functional, cross-disciplinary group of people to do this assessment. So making sure that we're, getting people from product, from research, from design, from, business, all across different departments to make sure we're kind of getting that fuller assessment. And then, again, that would be just a couple of some representatives from each of those departments to make sure that, both at like high level and at lower level. So people who are making those strategic decisions, but also people who are working day to day underneath them and who may be the ones who are actually directly affected by the work that we're doing.
Yeah, a really important thing to think about. So we don't try to do anything blanket across an organization because that has, I don't think, ever worked in the history of this kind of work. But creating those smaller groups, those cross-functional representations, and building them around influence. So often what we'll do is we might start with 1 or 2 product teams, those cross-functional teams, and work with them, and then scale out from there. We have done things where, we might limit our work to focus just on, say, a design group. Maybe that design group is working as an internal consultancy, and so we work to improve things there. But then we scale out into the next level of influence we can. So their closest partners maybe being development or product management. So it's really about get as cross-functional as you can. Focus on where you have actual influence. Where you have people that are really going to make change. That's a real big part of this, is that commitment to change. If you're just hoping that people are going to pick up things by proxy, it doesn't happen that way.
Great. Those are the 2 questions we got in. So I'm going to go ahead to the last slide. And again, you can email us. We'll be mailing out the recording, the slides, everything, probably tomorrow. So you can just reply back to that email if you have some sort of epiphany, or reach out to us in other ways on Twitter, etc. But just thank you so much for attending. We really appreciate your time. I know even taking an hour out of your day is a big commitment, so we're really glad you're here. Just to let you know, we're here to help you advance your design and innovation goals. In addition to what Adam and Lindsay just talked about, we also offer research and strategy work, user experience design and development, service design, intervention design and evaluation, and design and innovation challenges. So again, thank you so much for your time and your attention, and stand by your email, and we'll be sending out information in the next day or so. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.